Hi, it's great to have your company. You're listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. My name's Simon Smart.
And I'm Justine Toe.
Well, Westerners tend to take religious freedom for granted. But our guest today will share stories of what it's like to grow up in a place where religious commitment can make you an enemy of the state.
Viktor Akhtarov is director of FEBC Russian Ministries. Now, FEBC is the Far East broadcasting company that aims to share Christianity with people who can't freely access religious material.
Now, Viktor grew up in eastern Ukraine in the 1970s. He spent a lot of time in Moscow as well. We're really glad to have him in the studio to tell us about his experiences of growing up a Christian in a climate that's hostile to religious expression. Welcome, Viktor.
Oh, it's good to be here.
We mentioned in the intro that Westerners tend to take religious freedom for granted, but your family has intimate experience of religious restriction. Your father was a political prisoner in the USSR, imprisoned for his Christian faith, right?
Yeah, he was actually imprisoned twice. First time before I was even born, and the second time when I was 15. So he experienced the full force of the Soviet atheistic machine at that time.
Yes, and tell us about that. What was the particular about him that made him come into attention of the authorities?
Well, first of all, he was a scientist, and that was, being a prominent figure and a Christian, that presented a problem for authorities. And then he decided to build a church. They organized a little church in 1960s. And that was a problem because Khrushchev was in power at that time. And he spoke and said, in 20 years, I'll show you the last Christian on television. And they were organizing churches. And 5 of them were put in prison for that. And the second time, he was very, very active, very outspoken Christian, and very influential. He was not a pastor, just, a preacher, and being a scientist, being well-educated, which was a rarity in those times because Christians could not receive higher education. And he became a Christian after he received his education. So he was a unique figure in this way.
Now, the USSR famously tried to eliminate religion and replace it with their version of atheism. Why was atheism the preferred way of thinking for that regime?
That's a difficult question. And of course, there were different types of atheism. Under Stalin, it was one type of atheism, very, very aggressive. Under Khrushchev, it was just a different kind of push against the Christian church. And under Brezhnev, it was still a different type of atheism, more kind of relaxed. And only the most active, most outspoken people were prosecuted. So I think as a Christian, I believe that people have this desire to be worshiping a God. And I think Stalin understood this, being a former seminarian, understood this better than anybody else. And he tried to replace God with him, his own figure.
So there's a real sense there that the communist leader will tolerate no rivals in terms of allegiance for the people.
Definitely so, yeah. And it is, you get it from the very young age. You're incorporated into one kind of mass. Like when I was 10 years old, I had to make a decision. Do I become a so-called pioneer, which is, the young youth Communist League member or not? So for me, that was the first time I had to decide, do I tell people publicly, my friends, my teachers, that I'm Christian or not? So, and of course, when all of your friends are wearing those red ties, it is a difficult choice for anybody to make.
Well, let's talk about that. Like your experience at school, I've read that you were the only Christian in a student body of 1,000 and your father's in prison at this time. You said that he was in prison when you were 15. What was that like for you in school? How did you cope? Did it make you a target if you're not part of the pioneers?
Yeah, I was afraid I would be a target, and I was for some of the teachers. All my friends, though, were cheering for me because they said, "You're brave. You're standing against the system.
You're the rebel, basically."
I'm the rebel. Yeah. So I was lucky in this way. I did not lose even one friend, and I was afraid of that most of all. You don't care what teachers or school principal thinks about you, but you care about your friends.
Something else. What also gave you encouragement in that time?
Well, of course, we had our church, and we had a group of maybe 5 young people, and we were a close group. And of course, we had a church that was unregistered, with the government. So we would go into the forest and had our meetings there, would sing songs and play games. So it was a close group, and of course it was also helpful to be able to connect through radio. We listened to Christian radio. It was amazing. That's how I got first introduced to FEBC and Transworld Radio and all the different voices that came into our home. So when you're the only Christian in your school, and then you listen to the radio and you realize there is a huge number of people who also believe that gives you encouragement.
Now, during the perestroika period, as things started to relax somewhat, would it be true to say that people exhibited a spiritual hunger that was then there were opportunities to feed that, or was that not what you saw?
Not just somewhat. It was a revolution of the soul of the Russian person. People started seeking and looking because, as I said, the atheism was kind of diminishing anyways, and people were thinking about things eternal. And when freedom came, everybody was looking for answers. That's why organizations such as FEBC began receiving thousands of letters from people who listened through the years to the programs, could not write, or their letters would not go through. And finally, people were able to write. I read some of those letters, amazing stories of people who were secret believers. They were not brave enough or did not know how to go to church, did not know where the church would be, but they started to believe. And then when freedom came, everything just exploded in a very good way.
Well, tell us a little bit about the work of that FEBC, the radio networks that you're now, you received help from as a boy, and now you're working with.
Well, it is an organization that is covering Russia with Christian broadcasts. We are talk radio, and we let people ask questions. And we very often, when we discuss topics of faith, we invite non-Christians into the studio and let them ask questions and let them argue with us. And we don't always win the argument. We have a program with atheists, and sometimes they sound more convincing than we do as Christians. And that's fine. We are there to have this conversation with people and help them think about God, about Christ, and about what we believe. And we get challenged too, and that's a good kind of program.
If you've just joined us, you're listening to Life and Faith, and we're talking to Viktor Akhtarov from Far East Broadcasting about his experiences growing up in the Ukraine and Russia. Now, Viktor, you're very passionate about the plight of social orphans, as they're described, in Russia and other places in the former Soviet Union. How many people are we talking about here, and why are they in the position, why are these children in the position that they're in?
Well, the numbers are very difficult to find. I talk to some people and say up to 2 million if we're talking about Russia and Ukraine. Some people say about 1 million, and the official number is even lower. And the government is trying to hide the problem. For example, they used to have many orphanages, but they are building huge ones. And this is the worst thing you can do for an orphan, to put him in a huge orphanage with thousands of people living there. And I heard dozens and dozens of first-hand stories of mistreatment like that. And so about 10 years ago, we decided to do something about this and started to encourage people to become foster parents and take those kids out of the system and into a healthy family. And that was a huge cultural shift in Russia, because if 10 years ago, and it doesn't matter Christian or non-Christian, you ask a person, would you adopt a child? And they would say, why would I adopt if I can have my own? And now most of my friends have adopted, and thousands of people have. And that's probably the biggest social change that we've seen in the past 10 years.
You get the real sense, Viktor, that there's a real lack of social welfare that helps to bind families in order that they can care for their children. I thought that the Soviet Union and Russia was, the masters at state-sanctioned welfare. So how does that happen then?
First of all, Soviet Union and Russia are two totally different countries. That's why many people today in Russia are thinking about Soviet Union and saying, well, yeah, it was great because we had this safety net, Of course, nobody could make any money, but at least we had the safety. Today, there is none of that. Not to say none of that, but very little of that. And society is very, very different, People experience freedom without gaining a sense of responsibility for their lives. And the country was not prepared at all for this amount of freedom. And now everyone in Russia realizes that. And this is in part why Russians sometimes look at China and say, look what China is doing. They're doing this gradually. We should have done that. But what happened is happened. People received this huge amount, unlimited freedom, did not know what to do with it.
Are you saying then that the issues with the Russia's social orphan problem and other related problems, perhaps like the youth suicides in Russia, is that a legacy or is that a result of this kind of tremendous freedom that we just don't know what to do with?
Freedom combined with the legacy of atheism, no moral structure. The Communist Party, was trying to take that place of moral kind of guiding force. It's not there anymore. So people have this freedom without moral structure, without any kind of structure that helps them make those decisions. And on top of that, the government support that used to be there is not there anymore. And this is why we, as FEBC, we are doing a lot of programs to prevent these things from happening. So, for example, we are helping families in crisis. We have daily programs with different psychologists who are helping people resolve those problems. And sometimes, we are used to have in the Western society lots of help. You have TV programs, radio programs, books, and a lot of psychologists who can help you if you have a problem. That structure is not there in Russia. So we are doing this on public airwaves and helping people. And every program we have dozens of calls, and people are asking, how do I resolve this? How do I talk to my husband? What can we do in this situation? How do I talk to my teenager? Is he supposed to be independent when he's 14? Or, how to influence? How can we do something together? And very, very basic questions. So we address not only spiritual issues, but for the most part, especially with families, we address those practical issues and help people build normal lives.
Now, you mentioned spiritual issues. You at FEBC obviously think there's a link between these practical issues and the spiritual. How do those two things go together in the work that you do?
Well, probably the best gauge of that is the listener responses that we get, and people say how it is. Those two things are working in their lives, and it is amazing when you read letters and phone calls. You listen to phone calls from people. They say, "I started to rebuild my life, and then I thought there's something more. I feel, you know what you're talking about because there's something behind that. It's not just principles for healthy living. You have to have a purpose for living." And for example, especially with teen suicide, and Russia is number one, unfortunately, in the world in teen suicide. And we have so many stories when teenagers who they just do not know what to live for. They don't have any goals, any purpose in life. And many of them just kill themselves. And I was once in Moscow studio and listening to one of our broadcasters who was talking to a teenager who he got involved with some it's like a KKK kind of a nationalistic group looking for something, and he was disappointed with them, and he said, I'm ready to kill myself. The guy is 15 years old. So, and I heard how our broadcaster was talking to him, just ask his name, and he said, my name is Ivan, and he was kind of rough, and he was, nervous. And our broadcaster said, well, how does your mom call you? And he said, well, Vanya. It's a little different, softer name. And the conversation changed right there, and they talked for 15 minutes. I later met that guy whose life was completely transformed. He's doing social work now, helping other teenagers. And so stories like this just, break your heart.
Well, your work, radio work, is fascinating, doing a lot of good, no doubt. So good to get you in to talk about it. Thanks for coming.
That was good. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. For more on this topic and many more, go to publicchristianity.org.